Hi, Daniel.
Bob.
How you
How are
doing?
you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining us again.
Good to be here.
Some of our viewers and listeners may remember you. You are Daniel Ingram. I'm Robert Wright. This is the Wright Show, and you've been with us before. When we spoke about not just Buddhism, but about actual enlightenment, being enlightened, which you profess to be, and far be it from me to doubt you. You are the author of Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, an unusually hardcore Dharma book. And then on the title page it says, by the interdependent universe. That's a reference to Buddhist philosophy that I think we'll get to in case. And I mean, it's a little bit of a joke, obviously, but it has some Buddhism in it. And not facile Buddhism, actually. I mean, it's a serious... It's a serious thing. The interdependent universe, but conventionally attributed to the Arhat. Daniel M. Ingram. Arhat is a word that means an awakened one, an enlightened one. Far be it from me to judge who is and is not enlightened. I will say I'm convinced that, I've talked to a lot of serious meditators. There's no doubt you have reached a depth of contemplative being that, say, I, for example, have not reached. And if people want to know what that's like, what it's like to be you, they can refer to the last thing that we did. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, except to say it's better than the way I am. If I could do it, I'd do it. And one thing that's interesting, and this you have in common with Gary Weber, whom I've also interviewed, is that there was kind of a break. You worked very hard meditatively for a long, long time, and then there was kind of a zone you got to, and once you got to that zone, it wasn't so hard to maintain. It wasn't like you had to keep meditating 2 hours a day or anything. And so I envy you. I aspire to be you. You are my role model.
No, you should aspire to be you, just the best you can be from a sensate clarity point of view.
Oh, I didn't realize that was the goal. Well, I can certainly be better than I am. That's easy. It's being you that's hard. Okay, so anyway, what I want to talk about this time is the path to enlightenment. I mean, one point you make in your book, Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, is that actually there's a surprising amount of consensus among people who either, who have arguably attained enlightenment / awakening, or at least gotten it somewhere near there, a remarkable amount of consensus on the path that got them there, and the series of kind of realizations, the series of meditative experiences. I mean, a certain amount of variation, but there's also some things that they have in common, and this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years.
Thousands.
Thousands, you might, a couple of thousand. I mean, but there's a text. What is the thing by Buddha Gosa in the 5th century?
Visuddhimagga.
Yeah, right. That sketches it out, the path of purification. Now, so I want to talk about this path, partly because I want to talk about some of the early stages that might be more accessible to some of our listeners and viewers than maybe some of the later stages, at least in the near term. And the way I want to start out is the following. You use the word insight a lot in your book. One place meditators may encounter that is as a translation of the word vipassana, which is a school of meditation that goes way, way back. And the thing about vipassana is I think it's easy to confuse these days, at least in the United States, easy to confuse with the word mindfulness. I mean, I think a lot of times people might come back and go, oh, I just went to a mindfulness meditation retreat. And if you actually looked at the place they went to, technically it would be a vipassana retreat center. And in ancient Buddhist terminology, vipassana and mindfulness are not the same thing. But so how do you distinguish? What would you say about mindfulness as opposed to insight?
Well, mindfulness. So if I start with sort of Theravadan theory, mindfulness would be one of the 7 factors of awakening or enlightenment, and it's the first of them, and there are 6 more. And so the second would be investigation of the Dharma or the truth or sensate reality, which actually often is incorporated into mindfulness practices, as they call themselves. And mindfulness, in some ways, was clearly a way to rebrand something that is explicitly Buddhist as something that might be more secular, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But from a certain point of view, there's nothing particularly Buddhist about just being clear about what's going on in your sensate world. That's a natural human thing to do. Doesn't have to be Buddhist.
And that's what you're saying mindfulness is, just clear awareness unclouded by certain things that normally cloud clear awareness?
Well, so mindfulness gets defined a lot of different ways by different schools of mindfulness even. So you wouldn't even get to different mindfulness teachers to always necessarily agree on all the fine particulars, but the basic points remain. You're talking about sitting down or walking or whatever position you're in, noticing what's going on, noticing thoughts as thoughts, noticing physical sensations as physical sensations, noticing emotions as emotions. And then the question is, what do you do with those? So some will emphasize more about a sort of a more relative work, non-judgmental approach to just seeing your feelings come up or your breath or whatever it is. And some will be more technical, noticing lots of little sensations. Some will have different emphases, like being mindfulness of breathing or being mindfulness of how you're feeling. Being mindful of how you're feeling. Or, they'll have various sort of different things. So it's not like mindfulness itself is a totally homogeneous movement. It isn't. And mindfulness historically clearly came out of both Zen and the Theravada more specifically, but has other influences as well. But a lot of its influences are places of convergence. So it very much in some ways tried to be a sort of a convergent synthesizer where it said, okay, what are the key elements that we find in a lot of different basic essential meditation practices, and how can we strip that down to something we can package for a clinical context or for a psychotherapeutic context or for a mainstream meditation context, which are all good things from a certain point of view. That said, the mindfulness movement also sometimes might reasonably be pointed out to have stripped out a lot of the sort of more advanced technologies of some of those practices and traditions when they simplified things. So, but when you're trying to simplify stuff, that's what happens. So it's okay from a certain point of view. But there's a lot more to it. So, and so Vipassana, which has its foundations in 6 sense doors, 3 characteristics, 4 foundations of mindfulness, that has obviously a tremendous amount of overlap with, mindfulness, sort of modern secular mindfulness traditions.
Okay.
But Vipassana, from another point of view, is vastly more technical, does have much higher standards, advocates for, much more advanced stages of mastery and practice, and has a whole lot of theory to help with that, stages of insight, maps, and all that stuff.
Okay, so before we get into Vipassana per se, what did you say is the relationship between mindfulness and investigation?
So again, and this sort of depends on the teacher and the tradition, because it's not like mindfulness is a homogeneous entity. It isn't, right? So, John Kabat-Zinn stuff, the MBSR stuff would look a little bit different from some other mindfulness teachers, would look a little bit different from, some of the people who might teach at IMS, or some of the people
all of those
all of those look a little different from each other in terms of their
if you read the oldest
backgrounds and, all that stuff.
And if you read the oldest Buddhist texts that have the word that's been translated as mindfulness in them, kind of the closest thing to like a ancient Bible of mindfulness or something, you would find something different still. That wouldn't seem exactly like what any of these people are saying, probably, even though there's a connection.
True enough.
So
even Vipassana, as it comes down to us, is a widely, variable and rich and nuanced tradition with lots of different strains. So, like, if you, sat on a Goenka retreat, it would look different from Mahasi retreat. They're both clearly in the general big camp of Vipassana, but they have different methods, different emphases, while some strong commonalities as well. 6 sense doors, 3 characteristics, and a high degree of, developmental skill.
And maybe to give people a sense, who have not done any mindfulness meditation, like in just a difference in technique, as I gathered at the Goenka retreats, and those are available in the United States, in Shelburne, Massachusetts.
Lots of places actually around the world. Many places these are offered.
Goenka you will only see on video at them. Is he still alive? I don't know. But in any event, the technique there is to focus awareness on various parts of your body in succession, whereas an alternative common technique is to focus on your breath. That's just to give, both of those things qualify as a way to get into mindfulness, but that's an example of a difference of technique. So anyway, investigate. Well, sorry.
So actually have not been in a Goenka retreat. Lots of my friends have. My mom's had about 20 of them, and like lots of my friends have done these. They're very, very common, but actually think they spend about the first 3 days building up sort of more concentration-y sorts of practices often, and then we'll go to more body sweeping.
So they do breathing before the body scan?
Anyway, I haven't been on one of these retreats for those Goenka people in the audience, but I think they spend about the first 3 days more building up, more anapanasati practices, and then sort of go
breathing.
off. But anyway.
Okay. That's okay. So then what I should say is that there are mindfulness and Vipassana places like Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, where they don't get much into this body scanning thing that they do at the Goenka retreats. Anyway, there are differences. I mean, not in any.
Well, some people do. So there's lots of different teachers that come there, and actually, their 3-month retreat initially used to do more body scanning sorts of practices. They then later switched to noting practices. But there are different teachers who teach different styles. There are a wide range of styles. So I can't be certain I know of the range and how many of them are how influenced by Goenka. But anyway.
Okay. So just quickly then on investigation, a little more on investigation. Is mindfulness prepares the way for investigation?
So, from a sort of so I'll just talk sort of from my point of view. You have to understand what your basic objects are. So here's a thought. If you can't recognize a thought as a thought, as an experience, you're not going to be able to investigate. Here's the breath. You have to be able to notice there's the breath. Mm-hmm. There's another breath. There's the body. There's a feeling. There's, a cold, the sense of air on the skin, or there's warmth. There's movement. There's fluidity. There's the mind moving around. There's the mind being more still. There's the mind being clear. There's the mind not being as clear. So you have to get some basic ability to notice these are the building blocks of your experience before you can really finally investigate them. And so the initial development is proceeding with the skill set to actually notice what's going on. And most people, weirdly enough, even though they may be very successful, smart, intelligent people, when they first sit down on the cushion, notice that, in fact, that's not so easy, right? It's not so easy. The mind is restless. It jumps around. It gets lost in thought mostly. It may obsess about a certain painful sensation and miss lots of other sensations around it. Or for whatever, or, get lost in a daydream, or, be thinking about, life or issues. And you'll find that it takes a while to learn to just get enough, sort of meta cognitive awareness of what the mind is doing, and then what the objects of the mind are as sensate phenomena as they arise one by one. And so that takes that sort of mindfulness, which would be the first of the factors of awakening, is a crucial foundation for later investigation, where one begins to notice, okay, wait, how fast are these sensations oscillating back and forth? When did those sensations begin and end? Exactly what were they? How did they change? How did they shift? How fast were they? What did they feel like? What were there other components that I may have missed from a sensate point of view? What did that thought sound like? What did it look like? What did it, what really is that pain? Where is it? How often is it there? Where are its edges? Is it as strong a sensation as I think it is? What are the other sensations of the room? What are the sensations of space like, or visual sensations? How much of my thoughts are visual versus my actual experience being visual? Do I confuse those two? Can I notice each of those little things? So we begin from a basic platform of the ability to notice what's going on in our sensate experience, and then we start to notice things about those things that are going on once we start to get enough awareness to actually notice that, here's our sensate world, and we can actually sort of get out of our thoughts and issues and our other things that may be distracting us, our doubt, our boredom, our restlessness, or whatever, and actually start to focus on, okay, here's the 6 sense doors, and here's what are rising in them, and we can see those as objects.
Right.
And then that's the foundation for investigation of things like impermanence or suffering.